Good morning again. It's just so nice to be here and have it all working, and electricity and the organ, which takes electricity. We had a lot to be grateful for. For the last few months, the Truth Lesson curriculum has involved sharing with you a lot of the fundamental ideas about Unity's history and what Eastern and Western ideas have influenced Unity and the Fillmores, Unity's principles, and really just what we call the Unity path and the metaphysical meaning of some of the Bible stories, like the Ten Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, and so forth. Basically, Katrina and I have been answering many of your questions about who we are exactly and what the Unity path consists of, and what Unity tools can be used to change your life for the better. These keys involve personal growth and spiritual mastery in rather unique ways, especially in our Western culture. In fact, many people say that Unity is much more Eastern than Western, but actually I'd say it's both, because Unity teaches the wisdom of all the ages. Unity's ideas have been filtered through Western terminology and translations because its students lived in a Western culture. And of course, we would understand them much better in that way. Particularly, that was the case in the 1890s when Unity began. But this wisdom that Unity teaches is really the core of all true spiritual teachings. From the Egyptian mystery schools through Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, Taoism, Christianity, there are common threads which aren't just translations and cultural interpretations. There are basic principles that all true spiritual teachings contain. These common denominators are the core of the Unity teachings. And I hope that Katrina and I have adequately conveyed that point. If people understand correctly, they will know that the core of all spiritual teachings are love, compassion, forgiveness, a sense of unity, and purity. No religion has a monopoly on these basic spiritual truths, as we say here often, because they are the very framework of this universe that we live in. And if we don't want to always be swimming upriver against the current, we'll align ourselves with these basic laws of the universe. It's not just spiritual, it's smart. We can't really say exactly which Unity ideas are better or more important than others, because the value of each one depends entirely on you. Your individual needs, goals, and values at a particular time in your growth. There is no cookie-cutter dogma at Unity, which tries to mold each one of us all to be exactly the same way. Every person is on a slightly different path. And we are all at different places on that path every day, hopefully, because we're constantly progressing. But if someone were to ask me which 3 keys I consider to be the most important, my response would be similar to the truth lesson that I'm presenting today. I'm going to share with you 3 ways that I consider to be of utmost importance in the process of spiritual growth. These are tools which I think can serve you well in becoming the kind of person that you want to be and living the life that you want to live. Basically, being happy. Being happy is what every human wants, and that's every human's birthright, to be happy. The first key to manifesting happiness, or what is often referred to as manifesting heaven on earth, is a very old teaching. It is reported to have been inscribed above the doorway leading to the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and Greece. The teaching is this, and we've been talking about it a lot lately: know thyself. We've talked in various ways about it recently, but I think it's important to state that self-knowledge is the first key. You have to know your machine before you can fix it. A doctor has to know what's wrong with you before she can heal you. In this case, for example, we have to know how we are suffering before we can get rid of the suffering. Before we can actually eradicate our misery, basically. You wouldn't want to go to a psychiatrist, and I'm sure none of you would, and say, "I've got a problem, give me a pill." You would have to tell the doctor whether you are anxious or depressed or constantly angry, or give him a little clue about what is the problem, what kind of pill do you need. This teaching, know thyself, seems deceptively simple, but there's so very much that lies behind these words. Very few people have attained self-knowledge. One reason for this is that the attainment of self-knowledge generally requires a very long time and a great deal of effort. Perhaps the primary reason that most people don't even begin this real process is because of the illusion that they already do know themselves. I'm just shocked on a daily basis. I've been working with some of these tools, and the things I'm seeing, I just can't believe I've gone this far without knowing these things about myself. And I don't like a lot of what I see, but that's okay. It's still part of knowing ourselves, so then we can deal with those things. And when starting this process of knowing yourself, be careful, and I've really noticed this, be very careful to not judge yourself. Don't try to change anything you see. Just observe. Maybe 2 years after you notice doing the same thing over and over again, being judgmental, for example, you can think about maybe changing it. But for the time being, just observe in an effort to know thyself. Knowledge is power. If we were to ask the proverbial man on the street if he knew himself, he'd probably say, "Of course I do," and then proceed to tell you his name, his address, his occupation, whether he's married or not, has children. He might even continue for hours telling you his personal history and life experiences. At the end of this lengthy discussion, he might say, "You see, I certainly know myself." In spite of all this information about himself, the person may not have a clue about who he really is and what makes him tick. Information about ourselves is not true self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is an inner realization of who we really are and what makes us tick. What makes me angry? What makes me judge another person? What makes me not like another person instantly? I can't love them instantly. What is it? The mortal body that we inhabit and the personality that we have constructed to meet the world, which we need, is but a tiny part of who we really are. Information about ourselves is not at all the same as self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is an inner realization of who we are, what makes us tick. What is this machine made of that I inhabit? What is its programming? What triggers it? The mortal body that we inhabit and the personality that we have constructed to meet this world is but a tiny, tiny part of who we really are. Thinking that information about ourselves is the same as self-knowledge is like looking at the cover of a book and believing that we've already read it. True self-knowledge deals somewhat with the outer person, true, but it's also very much the inner person, often hidden to ourselves. True self-knowledge is not a list of facts and figures, but a deep, intuitive understanding of our true nature. What motivates us, what upsets us, what makes us truly happy, what makes us truly mad. This self-knowledge cannot be contained within words and numbers. The poet Khalil Gibran says it so well in his masterful work, The Prophet, which probably most of you have read. Let there be no scales to weigh your unknown treasure, and seek not the depths of your knowledge with staff or sounding line. For yourself is a sea, boundless and measureless. Perhaps the most obvious question at this point is, well, how does one discover and experience true self-knowledge? There have been hundreds, perhaps thousands of books written on the subject, and I'm sure many of them are very good, and I'm sure you all have all read many of them, yet not one of them has the complete answer, because self-knowledge is a very personal process. The path that is right for one person is not right necessarily for another. I'll share with you, however, what I believe to be the most important tool in the process of self-knowledge. I'm sure you can guess it. What do you think is the best tool for self-knowledge? Awareness. And how do we do that? Meditation. Raise your hand. Who said that? Meditation. Thank you, Dr. Holly Grove. The tool is meditation, a regular period of meditation, a time when you still your body and your conscious mind and tune into the inner self, which is the whole world, basically. In the stillness of meditation, we're able to discover a power within us that transcends all the ideas of the mortal mind. Remember, Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore went into the silence, as they called it, for an hour every single night. When we begin to experience that heightened power within us, then we have begun the process of self-knowledge, which is the first key to spiritual mastery. Self-knowledge. Know thyself. Another important tool for self-knowledge, the second, is akin to it somewhat, but it's not the same thing. Self-observance. Being the witness out there all during the day, watching yourself talk, walk, act, watching what you think, watching what you feel, as if you were someone else. You're the witness. Stop at regular intervals and ask yourself, where is my right foot? Where is my left hand? Where am I tensed up right now? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Just notice. Don't reprimand yourself about anything. Just notice. After a couple of years of noticing that you get angry or sad when people say or do a certain thing, you'll have a clue about your inner insecurities, your desires, your fears, your programming, why your buttons get pushed. Then you'll better be able to get free of this stress and suffering, because you will know yourself. Know thyself. The second key to self-mastery is self-acceptance. To be more specific, absolute, unconditional self-acceptance. Most of us do accept ourselves to some extent, but that acceptance is usually conditional. We generally have no trouble accepting ourselves when our thoughts and our feelings and actions are in accord with what we consider to be acceptable or appropriate. But woe to us if we should fail to meet these self-imposed standards. Most of us are far more critical and demanding of ourselves than we are of anyone else. We'd never dream of being that critical toward a loved one. Unconditional self-acceptance means that we accept ourselves no matter what we do or don't do. Unconditional self-acceptance means that we treat ourselves as we would a very dear friend, with love and compassion. Self-acceptance does not mean that we think we're perfect or that we're a finished product by any means. Rather, it means that we accept ourselves wherever we are in the process of our growth, on our path. We don't have to be perfect, whatever that means, in order to deserve our own love. You don't reject a third grader because they aren't doing 8th grade work or pre-calculus. You are a process on your path, learning and improving all the time. Self-acceptance is very closely related to self-knowledge. As we become more aware of who we really are, then it's easier to accept ourselves, no matter how we appear to be. Most mothers will love their child, whether or not that child is clean or dirty. It doesn't matter. She may prefer that he stay clean, but her love and acceptance of her child doesn't depend on it. It seems like a paradox. Now, you might say, well, if I accept myself, no matter what, I may not improve, I may not get better, I may do this again. But the truth is that the best way to really change, and perhaps the only way to really change, is to completely, unconditionally accept ourselves right now with no reservations and no conditions. Children who are loved unconditionally are a lot easier to change and work with than abandoned or rejected or abused children. Rejected children see attempts to guide them as manipulation and a power struggle, and the same is true for us. We versus our ego. We must raise ourselves in loving ways. Self-acceptance is the second key to spiritual mastery. Interestingly, the third key to spiritual mastery is self-discipline. Some of us may cringe a little, particularly in New Orleans, when we hear the word discipline, because it's often associated with the idea of force and willful self-control. We may associate self-discipline with things like dieting and attempts to stop smoking or drinking or consuming caffeine or having to launch out on a big exercise routine. There's a tendency to associate the word discipline with the word punishment in our society. We tend to think that self-discipline is quite the opposite of self-love, when indeed the opposite is true. Self-discipline is a product of self-love. We develop self-discipline precisely because we love ourselves and we want the best for ourselves. Every person knows that to raise a child without any form of discipline is not only foolish, but is not a very loving thing to do. Developing a sense of discipline in our children is one way of showing them that we love them. So it is with ourselves. Self-discipline is a form of self-love because it saves us from all kinds of chaos and suffering and time. Whether it is following the 10 Commandments, the Buddhist Eightfold Path, or basic societal legal laws, structure and creating some parameters in our lives can help us and guide us so that we don't do something that ends up restricting us in far bigger ways, maybe going to jail. Self-discipline is not rigid self-control. It's a matter of making ourselves, it's not a matter of making ourselves anxious or uptight. That's not the kind of self-discipline I'm talking about. One of the best examples of self-discipline can be seen when we watch a wild animal stalk its prey, when we see a domestic house cat stalk a bird or a mouse, for example. My Dobermans can display an incredible amount of self-discipline when they're stalking a squirrel. Yet they're certainly not anxious or uptight. They are simply doing what's natural for them to do to gain a bigger prize, until I go out and interfere. We too gain a bigger prize in life when we observe certain rules. It's good strategy. It's old wisdom. It's just smart. There's a principle of physics known as inertia. Inertia is the property, of course, whereby bodies at rest will stay at rest and bodies in motion will stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Now, this principle also seems to apply to us, not only on the physical level, but also at the mental, emotional, and spiritual level. We have a tremendous amount of inertia within us. We tend to continue doing things the way we always have. We think the way we always have. We even feel the way as a result we always have. We tend to think and feel in the same old ways. We tend to see from a perspective that was often developed a long, long time ago, and we will usually resist any attempts to change this perspective. Even when we consciously want to change our thoughts and feelings and behavior, as we often work on here at Unity, there's a very powerful part of us that resists that change and continues to keep things the way they are, inertia. So self-discipline is the willingness on our part to move against this force of inertia in order to facilitate our growth. It's good for us. We discipline ourselves precisely because we love ourselves enough to want to grow and extend ourselves beyond our existing conditions and limitations. People who are always making poor choices and don't discipline themselves are usually just self-sabotaging because they don't love and respect themselves. And this is the whole point of the second key. We have to love and respect ourselves. They don't accept themselves unconditionally and they punish themselves. And we all do that in small ways all the time. Self-acceptance must precede self-discipline. Otherwise, our attempts at self-discipline are just doomed. So self-knowledge is the first key to spiritual mastery. As we begin to learn who we really are, then we can learn to love ourselves as we really are. And that's the second step, unconditional self-acceptance. From that foundation of love and acceptance, we then implement the third key, which is self-discipline. Self-discipline is the willingness to extend ourselves beyond our present limitations. These three keys, knowing ourselves, unconditionally accepting ourselves, and disciplining ourselves, are very important and I believe essential to the attainment of true, ultimate spiritual mastery. There are classes, books, other people here at Unity and elsewhere with whom to work and help you with these endeavors. We are all walking each other home. And by home, I mean back to our natural state of love, unity, forgiveness, and acceptance of everyone, especially ourselves. whatever they are doing, wherever they are on their spiritual path, whether they are still operating totally as a stimulus response machine, bound to their programming like a toy soldier that's been just built that way in a factory and it's wound up and it's gonna go a certain direction, or whether they have totally freed themselves of all but their divine essence, or whether they're working somewhere at another level in between, as is the case with most of us. They and we are all on the path going home to our 0 point of love, compassion, peace. In that way, we're all walking each other and ourselves home. I wish you well on this path, and I encourage you to share these tools with each other, remind each other, encourage each other. This is true giving. This is true tithing. It's giving to your friends, your family, your loved ones, your work associates. This is giving what is most needed in the world today. And we'll talk a little more about that next week.